Thank you everyone for being here today, especially our guest panel. We really appreciate your insights. Our team today is going to be speaking about Invest, building trust in the digital age. So collectively, this is our team. I'm Christina.
I'm Jessica.
I'm Will.
I'm Emily.
And today we'll be speaking about the challenge, and then from there moving into defining the problem. And from that we'll talk about some concepts that we tested. And from that, how we took those concepts to a solution. And then we'll be ending with future considerations. So first, the challenge. So our client is Invest Africa, which is a fairly young organization. Their goal is to take volunteers and volunteer groups and match those with NGOs on the ground in Africa providing aid. One of their aims is to make sure that the volunteer skills are being properly matched with the organizations who can use them best. So what we have been tasked with from the brief is that our goal is we've been commissioned to do the research, discovery, and define pain points and goals for the audience. And the audience is defined as, and it's an MVP onboarding flow. I should preface with that. Our audience is academic institutions with credit-based departments that align with Invest missions, and corporate entities with corporate social responsibility departments. So first we started off with an interview with our lovely client who happens to be here in the back today, Amiola. We gained some insights from speaking with her. So those main insights were, she really wants to make sure that her company is focused on vetting both the NGO organizations on the ground in Africa, making sure that they are legitimate and utilizing their resources properly, and also the individuals who she'll be working with, the organizations here and the volunteers. The audience, which I mentioned earlier, wants to make sure that they can trust and know Invest. So as I mentioned, Invest is still a fairly young organization. They don't really have a social presence yet, so that's something that we became aware of as well. And also, Invest needs a way to track the success of taking these volunteers and matching them with these organizations and the results of that. So to give you a little bit of background first, this is not the first time that Invest has actually worked with designation. There was a prior team who did some research for them as well. So the last team focused more on connections between the volunteers and organizations and how that would work. And so what they ended up creating was a place for volunteers to be able to build connections with like-minded individuals. And so there's still an opportunity that existed after that project was finished, mainly because what they built focused more on lower skill volunteering opportunities being prioritized, which meant higher skilled opportunities got shelved. And they did not create an onboarding flow because it was a minimum viable product. So now we move into how we started to define the problem. So we started off with doing some market research just to see what's out there, what organizations are doing, mainly looking at organizations who really focused on channeling volunteers to Africa, how they were set up, what their onboarding flows looked like, and we gathered some information as far as what's working well and how we can utilize those opportunities moving forward in our product. So some things that were working well. We found a few organizations who did say up front what their strict vetting process was, and we really liked that. It was very clear that they are looking for organizations with legitimacy. And we want to funnel that into guiding the users of Invest through a step-by-step guide also in the searching process. There were some organizations that were super transparent about how their resources are being utilized. So showing their 990s, for example, or just providing information about where their resources are going. And we really liked that. And we figured that we will use that to funnel a filtering tool for the users to be able to search for immediate results and find those opportunities and those organizations on Invest as well. Introduction to the company. This sounds really simple, but there were some sites that we looked at that didn't say who they were up front or give the users any kind of idea of what their mission statement was immediately, or there were organizations who gave too much information and didn't allow the users to start searching. So we just want to provide users with who we are and give them quick facts so that they can get started on their search. So before we started, we had a major assumption where we thought that this was our user base, academic institutions with departments that focused on the same values, aligning with INVEST, and CSRs. So we spoke to 8 different users to gather more information. 6 were individual volunteers and 2 were volunteer organizers. For example, one of them was an organizer at their church for organizing international missions, and the other was an executive director of a small nonprofit organization that funnels users to Africa. So as I mentioned before, this was our initial assumption of who our user base would be. But what we found out after speaking with this group of users was that the people we spoke with, the things that they had in common were actually the fact that they were lifelong spiritual volunteers. So these were not people from academic institutions or CSRs necessarily. The thing is that they were individual volunteers who were lifelong and spiritual. So we refocused a little bit, and we focused on the 3 main things that were common amongst all of the users we spoke to. They all had volunteerism instilled in them from a young age. So they were influenced either by a family member or a friend who started taking them along with them on volunteering projects from a young age. Also, they had some kind of spiritual or religious influence that really motivated them to give back. And they all mentioned that they hear about opportunities through word of mouth. So that is the main way that they're hearing about upcoming volunteer opportunities. So from that information, we created 2 personas to really guide our process on what the users need, what their frustrations are. So we came up with a primary persona. Her name is Grace. She is the established empowerer. She is 35 years old. She's a real estate agent and an entrepreneur. She's a 2nd-generation Nigerian American who loves to volunteer in her spare time. And Daniel is our secondary user persona, who is the proactive planner and speaks more to the organizers. So he is currently the director of international outreach at his church. Grace, some of her goals. She wants to maximize the time she has. As somebody who is both a real estate agent and an entrepreneur, she's very busy, so she really wants to maximize her volunteer time. And as somebody who is a 2nd-generation Nigerian American, it's important for her to make connections and relationships with people in her home country. Some of her frustrations, again, she's busy and she doesn't have time for a long application process. And she might be a little bit type A personality, and she really dislikes disorganized volunteer work. She wants to use her skills where they will be used properly. For Daniel, his main goal is because of what he does for a living. He wants to build international relationships. That's his mission. And his frustration is, as a planner, he wants to make sure that he has clear logistics, so when he doesn't get that, it leaves him a little deflated. And now I will pass it off to my teammate Jess, who will be speaking to our problem statement.
So our problem statement became moralistically motivated lifelong volunteers need a simple and informed way to join a reputable outreach organization with partners in Africa, to share their skills and resources, because it can be overwhelming to obtain project logistics and build trusted partnerships, especially when volunteering abroad. This is an overview of our design principles based on all the insights and the narrative that Christina established. So, simplified but thorough. Users should have something that's easy to use and gathers all the important data. There's informed direction, so users should be kept abreast of what's required of them and have it well communicated to them. Showing impact. We need to remind users of the sustainable impact that they're making in order to maintain their motivation. Transparency of resources. Users should always know how organizers and organization distribute skills and funds in order to boost legitimacy. So taking the design principles and problem statement, it created a path for our early concepts to take. Some initial concepts were the easy apply, which was built on the first design principle of simple but thorough, the sign-up guide, which was built off of the informed guide, and the skill match was based on the showing impact. Facts Up Front was based on the transparency of resources principle. So what did we learn from these? We learned that less is always going to be more. Users expect minimal onboarding because users actually don't like going through long, tedious forms. They also want to know where to look for things in terms of content. And we also discovered that we had two overlapping concepts. Some actionable insight of things that we could do is have a personalization of search. So we discovered that there's skill matching, but we also discovered through user interviews that people want to be matched to more than just their skills. They want to be matched by their interests, their passions, and things like that. So we also wanted to establish trust and build on this in order for them to be confident moving forward. So we decided to go back to our research and build more on our problem statement of building trusted partnerships. So we rethought our concepts, and we combined two of them that were very similar, and we created a new one because 100% of our users said that they discovered volunteer opportunities via word of mouth. So in creating our prototypes, segmented onboarding was the combined concepts, and it built on efficiency of forms. Review and share capitalize on the reviews and building on that personal connection that users would want. Know Before You Go is more refined details of the facts. And the perfect match was more than just skills, it also offered different types of volunteer opportunities. So, what did we learn from these? Trusting. Personal connections versus facts up front. So we discovered that there's two pools of users that build trust differently. First, by looking at reviews or establishing a personal connection, or by looking at all the details and transparency of information. Once trust is established, users will become excited for the opportunity, and this will become the fuel to go through any application process. So now I'll pass it off to Will to talk about how we converge all these concepts.
So after conducting user testing on our mid-fidelity prototypes, we mapped out what our users liked and disliked and wanted in an infinity diagram just to determine what they had in common. So what our users liked was clear information. They liked having the trip details and requirements clear and upfront. Personalization, they liked being able to enter their skills to find opportunities. They also liked being able to enter to sign up using their LinkedIn or social media. And personal connection, they liked being able to share the trip with their social network. They also liked being able to see reviews from previous volunteers and also contact those volunteers just to get their experience. And on the other side, what they disliked was lack of details. So I did mention that they liked the clear information, but they still felt that there was some some important trip information that was lacking. And then confusing wording or features, this speaks specifically to the virtual volunteering. Without any context or any video, they just were confused about what that actually was. And then overwhelming page elements. So they felt that some pages were too cluttered. They felt that it was distracting for them when they're trying to achieve a goal. So taking this feedback, we decided to rethink our prototypes and come up with some opportunities. So more trip details. Users specifically mentioned that they wanted timeline features and also by country, other than just skills. And then expanded filtering options, so that just speaks to also the timeline and country. They just wanted the filtering to include that. And the feature information requirements, that speaks to the virtual volunteering that I mentioned, just providing more context on what that is, and also giving volunteers the requirements of what will actually take place if they do choose that option. And then user-friendly visual styling just speaks to the page elements, making sure there's nothing that's distracting to the user. So after that process, we came to a converged concept. It is a welcoming and informative website that provides transparency of information and documentation of experience to build trust and establish a personal connection with users while giving them the ability to find skill-based opportunities and ignite a desire for the user to get involved. And so in this process, we also came to this big insight. Going back to our first pivot that Christina mentioned of having lifelong spiritual volunteers, we were thinking, how are we actually going to solve for the needs of these users? We were, as Jessica mentioned, that we converged the concepts to address the word of mouth. We were still thinking about the spiritual aspect. So with that question in mind, I'm going to hand it off to Emily, who's going to present our final solution.
Thank you, Will. Okay, so now we're going to bring the converged concept to life. As you might remember, Jessica mentioned that there's two types of volunteers that we talk to. Those that value transparency and those that value a personal connection to build a sense of trust. And this sense of trust is what convinces them to join the organization. So we named our product Entrust. And so now I'm going to walk you through Grace, our user's first time flow through Entrust. And I'm also going to point out where our design principles take form within our design. So here we are on the home page, and she sees the Get Started button, current featured projects, and scrolling all the way down to About Invest, showing transparency, and she can see the impact that we've had. And so she's feeling invigorated. She's going to press Get Started, and this is going to take her to the next page that's going to be showing her what skills are you good at. So these are things that she can filter by. Timeline, country, project type, and if she is volunteering with religious preferences, she can also sort by those as well. And so that's all going to lead us into her matches. So you can see that her 100% match is monkey habitat construction. So she wants to see a little bit more about it before clicking into it. And so she can just hover over before she decides, okay, this is what I want to do. So we start building a personal connection from the moment that she clicks on this page. She can look at the video, directly contact somebody, and she can see the details of what's provided and not provided, transparency. And so to show further impact, she can see what other users have gone through by looking at reviews. Adding to the personal connection, she can directly contact these people, and to build a sense of confidence, she can see that they volunteered on 5 projects already. Now she's ready to get started. So she's going to hop back to the project page, and she's going to click Apply, which is going to lead us to our application flow. And as you can see, we're providing her with informed direction from the second she lands on this page. Simplified but thorough comes into play here. Our application process is very thorough. We want to make sure that the right people are going to invest, but we want it to be simple. So we allow them to connect their social media accounts to populate the fields. As you can see, Grace is a volunteer. If this were Daniel, he would select group organizer in this section. Also, as this was populated from her LinkedIn, it highlights the fields that were not populated just to help her along her journey. It's also going to give her transparency by allowing her to read the privacy policy. So now we're on the references and resume step. With transparency and informed direction, we explain to people why the references are required. And also, when we move on to resume, it will show why they're required there as well. As you can see, adding references from LinkedIn also makes her journey a lot easier. And she scrolls down, and her resume is already added for her. So we're going to save and continue, and move on to our final section before she can confirm. So, statement of intent. As Christina mentioned earlier, this is a very important thing for Invest to be thorough with the volunteers that they're getting. We want to make sure that they're the right fit, so we want them to tell us why they're the right fit. Now, she can also upload a file if she doesn't want to type in, but we want to make sure that she made no mistakes on her application before continuing, so we ask her if she's sure she's ready to submit. And she has. So we're also going to give her informed direction here. We want her to know what the next steps are, that she's going to have an email waiting for her in her inbox. And building on the personal connection through the end, she can click on a video of volunteers at the monkey habitat to see what she's in for. And she can also redirect to the project page. So our future considerations are a combination of things that we learned throughout our many user interviews through the past few weeks that may have not fit into the scope of our project, and also things that we learned from our last round of user testing that we would like to implement moving forward. So for starters, people love that they can be skill matched, but they also want to see opportunities that aren't specific to their skills as well. As Invest is a platform for volunteers, group organizers, corporate entities, it's also a platform for organizations in need of aid. As we weren't able to speak with any of these people, we need to go through user interviews and find onboarding considerations for them as well. People love the filtering fields, and with that love, they want even more of it. So there are other considerations like urban versus rural that people would like to see in the filtering fields. As Will mentioned to you, virtual volunteering is the word of the moment. Everyone wants to know what it's about. They're super interested in it. But there are considerations with how that's going to work on the ground in Africa and just the feasibility in general of it. People love the transparency of individual organizations. They love the about pages and they want to see more just in general about it, including little breadcrumbs like what's required in the application before even clicking apply. So with that, that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and we'd love to hear any feedback or questions.
You just go for it.
Just whoever would like to go first. You guys
Okay.
questions.
So that was excellent. It was really well done. I love how each and every person got to speak. I thought that was really nicely done. There's a lot of information. And I know that from my experience working with clients, sometimes too many frameworks, they start to get confused. And I feel like if it were to be like a submission for a white paper or like a process on how to do and kind of repeat what you guys had done, this would be like everybody understands the steps that you went through. But I don't know if a client necessarily needs to have all of that. Their mind might start to wander a bit. So like for example, when you had like the likes and the dislikes and then the insights, the likes and the dislikes you could maybe speak to as you're looking at the insights, the third screen.
Yeah, I would echo what you said. Great job on the presentation. I think like the visuals and everything transitioned very seamlessly, and I think you guys did a great job with that. So, one piece of feedback that I had was again just the amount of information. Like some of the sections, like the design principles, I think those were gone through really quickly, and I would have liked to have spent a little bit more time like sitting with those. Because they were gone before I could even remember what they were. Mm-hmm. And I know you talked about them later on too when you were going through the designs, and that was great that we went back to them. But just being able to spend a little bit more time with some of those things. Yeah, and then I think one question I had too was there was talk of like testing the concepts with users, but I don't know that you ever talked about how exactly you did that. Like, were they the same users that you talked to originally? And you don't have to go into those details and present on all of it, but that was just a question that I had as I was listening. Like, wait, who did they talk to and how was that done? So.
Again, great job. One thing I would say in terms of delivery, maybe just slow down a little bit. I think everyone kind of try to get through it as quickly as possible. So just kind of, because it is a lot of information for us to absorb. And so some of the sections where we're focusing on the problem statement. It was a really long problem statement. It was, I think it was a little bit of a run-on sentence, but so trying to get that as concise as possible. I know it's a really hard thing to do because you want to make sure you're covering everything. I would have liked to spend a little bit of time just absorbing what we're kind of grounding this entire project in. That was a really important part. And then also really stating the challenge. It seemed like it was like 6 or 7 slides that covered the entire challenge. But I think it would have been nice to have like a summary of what you guys were trying to achieve. I love that you guys have design principles. I see that being skipped all the time. So that was really nice to see that you came up with something to kind of drive those concepts. Like she said, I would have liked to know why you came up with those design principles, why those were the most important, like how you got to that point. So just kind of making the connections for us as you go through, instead of just telling us what they are, give us the context of how did you make that decision? The concepts, so it was nice to see kind of the different sketches of the ideas. One thing that was a little bit missing for me was how are they connected? So what was kind of the full journey of the product experience of how these things work together? Because they felt kind of very separate, and I wasn't really sure how they work together in the full experience. So that would be something that I would expect to see. How do you kind of flow through those concepts? Yeah, again, you had mentioned you guys had tested. It would have been, I would have liked to know what your approach to testing was, who you talked to, how you showed it. You guys got to the demo, so that was really awesome to see the actual prototype. That maybe parts of that could have been shown earlier. So it wasn't kind of a big reveal, because that was really fast too, to kind of go through the whole product. I think maybe changing a little bit of the language that you guys are using in the presentation, where you're saying, you know, we're rethinking this concept. That makes it sound like maybe what you did first was wrong, that you kind of threw it out the window and you're starting new. It's really more of an evolution, it's an iteration, and just showing that you're making improvements based on what you've learned throughout the process. And the other thing was the like versus dislike. I don't think that's how you guys phrased the questions when you were probably doing the user testing. Do you like this? Do you not like this? It's more about like, was this what you expected? Is this what worked? This is what was successful versus this didn't work out. It wasn't a question of like versus dislike. The one slide where you said, kind of, this is our big insight. I would love to see that maybe reframed as this is the biggest opportunity. So this is, yes, it was derived from the insight, but kind of reframing that in a like a wow moment. This is a huge opportunity for us to address. Two more things. The one thing that I did notice when you were doing the demo of the product, the only thing that stood out to me that was like, oh, I don't know if you can do that, is where you're sort of adding in references for people and you're including their phone numbers and email addresses. There might be a little bit of a data privacy thing happening there. I'm not sure how much people would want that personal information into the system. So just having that as a consideration. Maybe you just do a link to the LinkedIn page and you can do messaging that way instead of adding all their personal information. And then wrapping up with all those future considerations, I think that's great, kind of looking forward, what's next steps. Maybe seeing a little bit of a prioritization around that, of saying, you know, this is really important, but these are some other things you can get to. That's all.
So I'll echo everybody else and say, very well done. This was really good. It feels like you guys have been doing this for years.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were nervous, I couldn't tell.
It feels like we've been doing it for years too.
Small point that I'll start out with is that you coordinated with your team visually. Like you guys are all dressed in a palette, which is I don't think you did it on purpose. If not, it's nuts. But
White and red.
yeah. And then I don't know if this was intentional, but you also coordinated with your presentation in a sense, you know, because it was a pretty stated palette. So if you had worn a bunch of colors, it would have distracted actually from the presentation. So well done there. So one of the points that Brittany made is one of the main points that I'd like to drive home with you as well is make sure that you're making connections throughout the presentation. So there's this idea of scaffolding, right? When you put out a concept, it becomes the groundwork for whatever you're going to say next. So make sure that that is scaffolding for the next thing that you're going to say. The other thing is overall, go for impact and emotion over thoroughness. So you're really just trying to drive home a point and a story and make sure that certain things are resonating with your audience, whoever they may be. So if you have a choice between not including something in a presentation and just reiterating a story or reemphasizing some more emotional point, go for the emotion. You can always sort of include the research and the background stuff in an appendix so that if anyone has any questions, you can just say, oh, okay, well, let me show you what we did and here's how we got here. But you really just kind of want to, drive it into their hearts and minds, essentially. On that point, something like the sketches, so when you were showing the initial concepts and you were showing the sketches, I think you made the point that it was a little bit difficult to interpret what was happening in the sketches. And I think it's good to show your work, but in a case like that where you're not actually going to demonstrate what's happening, use it as decoration in a sense. So they get the point that you've done the work, but it's not a focus point of the presentation. Okay, so the last thing that I'll leave off with, which is something that I recommend for everybody, is walk into all presentations with the idea, sort of this concept. If your audience walks away from this presentation remembering only one thing, what is that thing? And then make sure to sort of pick that up as a theme throughout. So I think you did well with the problem statements and the design principles. If there's a way that could be this really punchy, tight theme that you introduce, and then you support, and you reintroduce, and you support, and then you sort of end with, they'll walk away thinking exactly what you want them to think. One more thing is, I thought the future considerations were great. Were this an actual client, or were this a project that I was working on, I would talk about more concrete next steps as well. So, okay, so now that we're done with this phase, it's going to go into development. Here's what that looks like. We talk about timeframes and things like that. And then to Brittany's point, prioritizing all of that would be great. But outside of that, all of the stuff that I'm saying is icing on a cake, and you did great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I only gave one of my pieces of feedback, but I had more. I still think you did really well. That isn't. But I would say. So how many slides was it?
39.
How many?
39.
Cut it in half. Make it 20, and then linger on the slides and talk about what you wanted to say in the next 3, and have more imagery and have fewer words. And it sucks because you have to memorize it, but you already have it all memorized anyway. And lean on speaker notes if you can, or practice and all that good stuff. But I would just cut that right in half. And then, one of the things that I was going to say, and I don't mean this as harsh as it's going to come out, but it sounds like you all displayed confidence, and when we've all sort of commented on that, but I think that the presentation didn't, because it kept believe me, and by giving you more and more and more information. But if you have your presentation show confidence by not sort of giving as much information, does that make sense? It's just assume that we're right, because we are, and we're talking through it rather than, I always remember learning in high school, if you're going, and not you're lying, but if you're going to lie, don't give a lot of information, because then you have to remember it. Let's see. So one thing that I thought was really interesting, but I think it was either just glossed over or maybe I missed it. But so you started off thinking that the audience was CSR or academic, but then you're like, no, we scrapped that, and now it's this person or that person. But what made you scrap that? Why? And then how would that? What are the implications? So first, what are the assumptions that got scrapped, thinking from the CSR to the audience, or to the academic, to now this means, which again isn't like throwing it all out the window, but it's an evolution, and it was probably a really big pivot point for you. So you could have talked about that for 20 minutes. And I love that the focus on, instead of thinking about somebody from their perspective of their role, which all clients do. Like, my audience is a lawyer, my audience is a school teacher, my audience, to move it into more motivation-based, which could span lawyers, school teachers, etc. Like, that's huge, and I think that says a lot about your sophistication and knowledge of what audience, what personas are, and the purpose. So that could have been something, that could have been, in addition to the design principles, like another thing that you wanted them to take away. And then, so I've literally had a colleague of mine who was reading from the slide, and the CMO of our whatever they're called, client, got up and walked out of the room. Swore and got up and walked out of the room. And so they have a thing about, you can't know everybody's sensitivities, but they have a thing about reading from slides. So that I'm probably more sensitive now to it because that had happened, but I did notice that there was a little bit of that. But I think if you remove a lot of the words, like we're saying to do, you won't have to do that as much. And more imagery, and then that way, because you know this, I'm sure, the psychology of, like, we were all reading it as you were reading it too, and we were in different places, and so that's probably also why I was like, I don't understand what's going on sometimes. And then I just had a couple of things about the prototype, but other than that, yes.
Wait, I have more.
Okay.
I'm just gonna go ping ponging back and forth.
I love it.
Great. So I love Sarah's point on the fewer slides, and for so many reasons. One is that you'll often find yourself doing presentations the night before, and having fewer slides to make is going to save your bucks. Like, let's just, from a practical standpoint, it's going to be great. The other thing is, she's completely right. As your audience, we're going to be reading and not paying attention to you or what you're saying, because that's just our natural tendencies as humans. So if you want to refocus the message on what's actually coming out of your mouth, then you should put fewer things on the screen that we're going to be looking at. And then the other thing that Sarah brought up about the user interviews and how you got to those pivots, I did see a quote in there, but more of the user's voice. So like, make me feel like I also spoke to the users, because that will help sort of bring home any of the things that you learned and make me feel like I was a part of that process. Okay, that's all I have.
Yeah.